It's a cold November day in the city. Sometime in the future, you wake up, reach for your iPhone 19. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no 6G. You think it's just you. Then you pop to the corner shop to purchase something, but you can't use the card machine because their internet is also down. You open X to find out what's going on. Nothing. You open TikTok. Nothing. You open your banking app. Unable to connect. And then the emergency broadcast hits every television and radio station on the planet, and you realise with dread the internet is down. Not just in your local city or even in your country, but across the world. No more remote work. Friends and family cut off. So could this scenario ever happen? And if so, what can and is being done to prevent it? In this new series, On the Edge, we're asking all the big questions about the future of the internet and networking. It's unfathomable to most people of my generation that the internet could truly go offline. We've lived with it our entire lives, and the common perception is that it is impermeable and architectured in such a way that this scenario could never come about. But increasingly, there have been signs that the internet is not as invincible as we thought. Remember the 2024 CrowdStrike outage? Windows virtual machines on the Microsoft Azure cloud platform began rebooting and crashing. Now the problem was a routine modification to a configuration file, but the damage was monumental. Users trying to boot up their machines encountered that most dreaded of image, the blue screen of death. The update affected 8.5 million Windows devices. Now, in the grand scheme of things, given that there are approximately 6 billion users of the internet, this actually might seem inconsequential. But according to their website and as reported by TechCrunch, CrowdStrike counts nearly 60% of Fortune 500 companies, more than half of the Fortune 1000 companies among its clients. Its services are deployed by 8 of the top 10 financial service firms. We might feel as if the internet is decentralized, but we increasingly rely on a small host of vital services that could very easily go offline, which could have a knock-on effect. And the internet itself is more vulnerable than you might think, but not in the ways that you might anticipate. The last few years has already given us some dress rehearsals for what a real internet blackout could look like. And again, it is not the scenario that you might be thinking about. Australia's second largest telco suffers a BGP routing overload, 10 million people offline for over 12 hours. In January 2022, Tonga's single cable snapped by volcanic debris, and there were 38 days of darkness, but there was satellite connectivity available. So let's break it down. You may have heard this statistic, that 99% of international traffic travels on just 570 active cables as of 2025, with 80 more planned. That's it. 570 threads holding the world together. Now, whilst this is true, remember that it applies to international, that's cross-continental traffic only, not domestic. So for example, US to US traffic stays on land-based fibre. And remember, it does not include satellite traffic either, which looks only set to increase in the coming years. So is it true that if you cut 30 of the right cables, an entire continent could go blind? Well, sort of. It is a bit more complicated than that. The US Congress admitted simultaneous attacks against multiple cables could cause serious long-term disruption, but they are difficult to carry out. In short, cutting cables doesn't mean the internet would stop if all transatlantic cables went down. Domestic connectivity, for example browsing US hosted sites like Netflix or Amazon, would largely survive thanks to vast land-based fibre networks, but international access would be crippled, leading to widespread slowdowns, higher costs and disruptions for global services. Foreign sites could go dark or ultra slow. But don't forget, big providers like Netflix also do caching on their content on local data centers. So if the intercontinental cables were cut, you wouldn't be completely lost. Hosting services likely cache a lot of popular content. For example, the BBC in their US data centers is not being called from the UK. But if not cables, what about cutting things off at the root? Let's talk about DNS, the domain name system. Think of DNS as the internet's phone book. Every time you type a web address, your device needs to look up which IP address that domain points to. At the very top of this system sits 13 logical root servers labelled A through These are the ultimate authorities that help route DNS queries across the entire internet. Now here's where it gets interesting. Those 13 names aren't 13 computers. They're 13 IP addresses, each replicated across hundreds of physical machines worldwide using a technique called Anycast. Anycast is brilliant. Multiple servers share the same IP address, and your query automatically gets routed to the closest one geographically. There's one in Iceland, one in Sao Paulo, one in Maryland. Over 1,700 instances spread across 130 plus countries. Now that sounds unbreakable, and the root system itself pretty much is. But here's what actually breaks. It's not the roots, it's the layer just below them. It's October 2016, a Friday morning. Users across North America and Europe wake up to find they can't access Twitter, Netflix, Reddit, Spotify, Amazon or PayPal. Major chunks of the internet appear to be down. So what's happened? Well, the problem is a company called DIN. DIN wasn't running root servers, they were an authoritative DNS provider, the companies that actually host the DNS records for major websites. When you typed twitter.com, your browser would eventually query DIN's servers to get Twitter's IP addresses. That morning, DIN came under 3 massive distributed denial of service attacks, something we know all about, DDoS attacks. Tens of millions of requests flooded their servers from an army of compromised IoT devices, security cameras, DVRs, routers. They were all infected. 2 hacktivist groups, Anonymous, who you might have heard of, and New World Hackers, claimed responsibility for the attacks. The security researchers found little credible evidence supporting those claims. The real culprit was more likely that the botnet operating autonomously, or potentially a state actor using the botnet as cover. The result, if your DNS query needed to reach DIN's servers, it timed out. The websites were still there, their servers were running fine, but users couldn't look up where to find them. It was like having a working phone number but no phone book to look it up in. The attack's scale was staggering. Traffic from over 100,000 malicious endpoints hit, and DIN's infrastructure, with some estimates suggesting that the botnet included over 600,000 compromised devices. So this then is the dirty little secret of DNS. While the root infrastructure is remarkably resilient, we've consolidated massive amounts of critical DNS hosting to just a few companies. The dominant players in authoritative DNS today: Cloudflare, AWS Route 53, Google Cloud DNS, Akamai, and on the recursive DNS side, the servers that actually do the looking for you: Cloudflare's 1111, Google's 8888, OpenDNS. If any of these suffered a DIN-style attack today, and millions of websites could become unreachable, not because they're down, but because the internet literally can't find them. Websites would still be there, your internet connection would work, but the directory service that connects the two, that would be struggling. And it wouldn't be a blackout, it would be more like the internet getting incredibly clumsy. Some sites loading, some timing out, some working on retry, everything feeling very sluggish and unreliable. The only thing that can actually kill the roots is breaking BGPS itself. That's the Border Gateway Protocol, which is kind of like a post office for the internet. BGP is how these networks discover and share paths between each other dynamically. Without it, you need every network operator to manually configure routes to every other network on Earth. What about sovereign kill switches? What do I mean by this? In the simplest terms, a sovereign kill switch is a government's built-in ability to slam the door on the internet within its own borders. Not the whole global web, just their little slice of it. They order ISPs to pull BGP routes, they can throttle mobile data or block DNS queries. Suddenly, 99% of a country's traffic vanishes. No Facebook, no WhatsApp, no news from outside. In theory, it's the digital equivalent of rolling tanks into the streets, but invisible. And while it's legal in over 30 countries, baked into national security laws, Surfshark has a great internet shutdown tracker which lists every country where the government has put restrictions on the internet. But of course there are ways around this. The most egregious example of this in modern times is the internet shutdown currently taking place in Iran following the recent protests, and the reported killing in some reports of up to 16,000 people carried out by the brutal regime. But as we'll hear later, even this isn't sufficient to completely kill the internet. But let's talk about another kill switch. Not if the internet goes offline, but if the layers on top of the internet go offline, rendering key services moot. Many key government services are hosted on AWS, and a recent outage this year showed how problematic relying on one provider is. Multi-cloud solutions are the answer, and recent outages have shown the need for diversity, keeping copies of key services with different providers. The internet in this sense is more fragile than we like to admit, and perhaps more so than it was 10 or 20 years ago. Not because the internet itself is less fragile, but because these key services in clouds are hosted by a small number of providers. And that in some ways is a more complex answer. But parry me for one moment. Imagine some highly sophisticated cyber engineer embarked on a calculating global master plan to cut all the cables, scramble DNS, and blackmail governments around the world to simultaneously shut off the internet. But we'd still be okay. Now here's the truth. A true planet-wide, everyone offline forever scenario is almost impossible. And here's why. There's around 7,500 Starlink satellites and counting, 1.8 million kilometers of lit fiber, 1,200 redundant cables, and edge caches that can serve Netflix, YouTube, stream for 48 to 72 hours without ever touching a backbone. We've also got mesh computing. This is a type of local area network that effectively allows devices like phones or computers to connect directly to each other rather than through a router or an ISP. It's peer-to-peer. Now mesh shines in failure scenarios because it's decentralized and fault tolerant, so no single point of failures like a submarine cable or DNS routes, but data finds alternative paths. So one cut or a DDoS attack doesn't kill the whole thing. IT works without internet, cell towers or power grids, so this is great for blackouts or censorship. And here's where it's being used in real life. In Ukraine, where internet is vital on the front line, Bravo Dynamics has introduced a new ground-based mesh communication system, Phantom 3. This is designed specifically for unmanned ground vehicles, and it's offering stable connectivity without the need for aerial relays. There's also edge networking, which fits into this. Instead of one giant data center on another continent, we may take tiny versions of that data center, GPUs, storage, DNS, and we can scatter them into 180 plus cities worldwide, usually inside the same building as your ISP or even inside the mobile tower itself. So now when you click play in Lagos, the request travels a few kilometers max, maybe 40 kilometers max, often less than 10 kilometers. And the round trip latency is about 5 to 15 milliseconds. So while the backbone was bleeding, anyone using Anycast, private interconnects, or local GPU cloud stayed online. The edge is a beast, as we know only too well at G-Core. Let's talk about the future then. The biggest problem with the internet right now is not the way the internet is architectured, it's how much we rely on a small handful of services and how far they are being responsible with a multi-cloud strategy. The future of the internet could look like this. We could move compute, storage, and routing to the edge. We might make local caches even more sovereign. And what about satellites? The latest iPhones have satellite connections for emergencies, and most airlines are now including Starlink connections as a perk. It's a new way of staying connected that's even more anti-fragile, bringing with it new challenges. You might also have seen our video on how Google is proposing to put satellites into space with GPUs and TPUs inside of them, literally running AI infrastructure in space. The doomsday scenario we started with, where we wake up to a world where the internet has gone down across the globe. It is science fiction, because there is a difference between the internet is down and my corner of the internet is down. So yes, parts of the internet can absolutely go offline in 2025, but it's a myth that by simply cutting a few cables you can take the entire world offline, especially if we keep building the resilient, distributed edge-first internet we all need as well. This is On the Edge, and I will see you in the next video.